We now come to the keynotes of our session on AI and democracy. Both speakers who will share thoughts with us, there's Lessig and Moshe Vardi. Each of them will speak about 30 to 35 minutes, and you will have the opportunity for a short Q&A afterwards. So let us begin with Lessig. He's an American legal scholar and also a political activist. He is the Roy L. Furman Professor of Law and Leadership at Harvard Law School. Prior to his return to Harvard, he taught at the Stanford Law School, where he founded the Center for Internet and Society, and at the University of Chicago. Lessig is the founder of Equal Citizens and a founding board member of Creative Commons. It's a non-profit organization devoted to expanding the range of creative works available for others to build upon, to share legally. I think you might know it. Lessig also clerked for Judge Richard Posner on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals and Justice Antonia Scalia on the United States Supreme Court. He holds honorary degrees from the University of Victoria, UC Louvain, Lund University, Athabasca University, and Amsterdam University. He's also well known for his book Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, published in 1999. He will now share his thoughts on AI and democracy with us, so please give a warm welcome to Lessig.
Oh, we don't want trees. Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could return the honor with some happy news. But I want to talk about AI and democracy instead. So at the end of 2024, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, issued this tweet. Algorithmic feeds, he said, are the first at-scale misaligned AIs. So what Sam wrote, we can think of in two ways. Number one, we can talk about just how right he is. Number two, we can talk about just how wrong he is. Meaning how screwed we are, meaning how screwed democracy is. So number one, how right he is. In 2024, AI mattered in the American elections, at least in two ways. Number one were the intended effects that it had on the election. Number two were the byproduct effects it had on the election. So let's start with the intended effects. There were two. First, there were foreign actors using AI to sow dissent in the United States. Lots of fake Russian sites, lots of bots from Russia. China had an explosion of Spamalot, which is from the 50-cent party model. There was an extraordinary thing really undercovered in the United States. There are areas of the United States referred to as news deserts. These are communities that have no local newspaper anymore because, of course, there are no local newspapers in vast parts of the country anymore. These areas were targeted by Russian interventions to build fake local newspapers online. And using AI, they populated the content of these fake local newspapers with AI-driven propaganda. And if you were in one of these news deserts, there was a 50% chance that you were reading news produced by these Russian AIs. So that's the foreign. And then there were domestic actors desperately trying to use AI to affect the elections. The most effective were the Democrats' use of AI to drive fundraising, which was extremely successful and will continue to be a central way AI gets used. Then there were bizarre attempts to use AI to fake endorsements. Then there are these kind of tiny examples of like creative AI to bring about better campaigning, perhaps. There's kind of bizarre example here. We should have some audio here. Maybe? Maybe I'm going to try to fix this. Yeah, this keeps on changing for bizarre reasons, but now it's so cool. You know, it's really super cool out. It's not really great at all, but I just want to make sure you get it here. So here, yeah.
I have another dream. Yes, it is me, Martin Luther King. I came back from the dead to say something. As I was saying, I have another dream. That Anthony Hudson will be Michigan's 8th district's next congressman.
Yeah, it was just that creative. So the point is that if this is the AI that happened in the 2024 elections, at least the domestic parts of it, I agree with the MIT Technology Review that its effect is overblown. This was not the year for AI. But AI's effect was not through the intended interventions by AI. AI's effect was the byproduct effect of AI. The byproduct effect from new media, social media. This is Tristan Harris, who was an engineer at Google, left Google when he got a flash of conscience to start the Center for Humane Technology. Veronica referred to this movie this morning, The Social Dilemma. He was at the center of that movie. What he was doing at Google was engaging in the practice of the science of attention, the effort to engineer attention, to overcome the natural resistance we otherwise would have to these technologies, to increase engagement. This is what every social media platform does. As Tristan puts it, it's a kind of brain hacking. Now, what would brain hacking be? Well, think about body hacking. This is a great book by Michael Moss called Salt, Sugar, Fat, telling the story of the processed food industry and their deployment of something called food science. It's a science to engineer food, to learn how to tweak the salt, sugar, fat mixtures, to exploit evolution, to overcome the natural resistance we otherwise would have so that we cannot stop eating this stuff so that they can sell food or maybe sell, quote, food. That's body hacking. Brain hacking is the same with attention. It's about exploiting evolution, the fact that we are rationally triggered by random rewards, or we can't resist bottomless pits of content, with the aim to increase engagement to sell ads. It's a business model. Let's call it the engagement business model, and AI drives it. And that business model creates obvious incentives. Shoshana's magisterial book describes these incentives, the incentives to know more, not just by watching us, but by poking us, tweaking us, asking us questions, rendering us vulnerable, reaching down the brain stack to leverage our insecurity so as to better sell ads. And in so doing, this business model imposes externalities on us, on the United States, on the world. As Zeynep Tufekci puts it, the companies are in the business of monetizing attention, and not necessarily in ways that are conducive to health or success of social movements or the public sphere, because it just turns out too bad for us that the best strategy, the most profitable strategy to drive engagement is the politics of hate. We engage more. The more extreme, the more polarizing, the more hate-filled this content is. AI learns it, so that is what we are fed. But even this way of putting it, the idea that AI learns it, makes it seem less poisonous than it actually is, as if AI is simply learning what we want and giving us what we want. But that's not what's happening at all. As Stuart Russell describes in this really fantastic book, talking about social media, he says, algorithms function on social media. They aren't particularly intelligent, but they are in a position to affect the entire world because they directly influence billions of people. Typically, such algorithms are designed to maximize click-through, that is, the probability that users click on presented items. The solution is simply to present items that the user likes to click on, right? Wrong. Let me emphasize that. Wrong. The solution is to change the user's preferences so that they become more predictable. A more predictable user can be fed items that they are likely to click on, thereby generating more revenue. People with more extreme views tend to be more predictable in which items they will click on. Possibly there's a category of articles that die-hard centrists are likely to click on, but it's not easy to imagine what that category consists of. Like any rational entity, the algorithm learns how to modify the state of its environment, in this case, the user's mind, in order to maximize its own reward. So imagine this in the context of food science. Imagine that scientists developing these products that we are supposed to eat discovered a product, let's call it A644, which when you add it to food, creates a kind of aversion to vegetables. Like if you eat this, then you all of a sudden no longer want to eat vegetables. And why would they do that? To increase the demand for processed food. Do they want to change the preferences to increase their profits? Now, if the processed food industry did this, we would think it's outrageous. So why is it okay in the context of social media? Because the changing of preferences through social media is obvious. This extraordinary book by Max Fisher maps the patterns in the United States, Brazil, Britain, and Germany, and demonstrates the way academic research supports the conclusion that the spread of social media entails the increase of radicalization. Why? Because radical views are more predictable and easier to serve. So we have political preferences changed as the byproduct of this engagement business model. So those are values, but it only gets worse because this feeding is part of an economy. As Renée DiResta, who used to be the head of Stanford's Internet Observatory, describes in her extraordinary book, Invisible Rulers, this economy has three components. First, there are the influencers, the people who are in the business of making sure that people follow them and do whatever they tell them they need to do. And second, there are the algorithms. I don't really have a picture of algorithms, but imagine this is what I'm talking about here, right? Algorithms that are used to figure out, to connect with the influencers and to connect the influencers to the third critical part, the crowds, us, who are consuming the content that the influencers are presenting. And what Renée describes is the way that these three obviously work together. And together, they increasingly produce what she describes as bespoke realities, increasingly put us into our own world. So we used to live in one world, but we increasingly live in our own worlds with our own constructed realities. As Barack Obama puts it, if you watch Fox News, you're in one reality, and if you read the New York Times, you're in a different reality. So for example, this tragedy that occurred on January 6, 2021 in the United States Capitol. Whatever you think about these protesters, one thing to recognize is they believed something. They believed their election had been stolen. As the Washington Post reported at the time, 70% of Republicans said they agreed with President Trump's contention that he received more votes than Joe Biden. And it wasn't just uneducated Republicans. A majority of college degree Republicans said they believed the election results were fraudulent. And so 70% of Republicans in the United States is the 32% here who at that moment said that they believed the election had been stolen. And some of those were so outraged at the idea that their election had been stolen that they marched on the Capitol to reclaim their democracy. And you tell me what you would do if you honestly believed your election had been stolen. But this isn't the worst statistic. This is. In the time since January 6, 2021, the number of people who report that they believe the election was stolen has not changed. We live in a time where we have more access to more information than ever in the history of humanity, and yet the information has no effect because the information is fed in ways that people consuming it want to consume it. We are fed what we want to believe, and what we want to believe is that we are right. This, I suggest, is something new. You may recognize this president of the United States, Richard Nixon, who after being reelected in one of the biggest landslides in American history, was forced before 2 years into that second term to resign. Now this graph maps Nixon's popularity among Republicans. You see, he was liked by Republicans about as much as Donald Trump was. Independents and then Democrats. Democrats liked him more than Democrats liked Donald Trump. But what's striking about this graph is that it's bouncing around for a period of time. But then in the months leading up to his resignation, support for Nixon collapses at the same rate across all three groups. Because all three groups are living not in a bespoke reality, but in a common reality. All three groups are watching the same television shows, telling the same story, having the same effect. This common reality, we used to call reality, is very different from the world we live in right now. Here's Donald Trump's approval rating across the whole of his first term. It never changed. Regardless of what happened, impeachment 1, impeachment 2, it's never changing because each of these three groups is living in their own bespoke realities. That's Renee's point. And we should see this as the new normal. And what that new normal means is that this changes everything about the way democracy can function. Because it's not just changing values as it increasingly radicalizes us, as it drives us to increasingly different positions. It's also changing reality as we each adopt our own view of what the world is and are fed the information we need to confirm our own view of what the reality is. We each live in our little bubbles, and this reality therefore becomes the world of realities. And if truth is a function of the chorus, the kind of Greek chorus, the thing that stands behind us, the thing that constrains what we are allowed to say, the thing that defines what we are ashamed to say, or what we'd be ashamed to be called, if that is the image of what culture is increasingly, it's not one chorus, but many choruses. And each of these people is worried not about what all of the community or the country thinks, it's what their corner of reality thinks. And with respect to everybody else, I don't care what your type thinks. Why would I care what your type thinks? And so the most important motivator of good behavior in public life, shame, disappears. This is our reality, and this bespokenness begets, it optimizes for what we could call fantasists. People who increasingly tell a story about the way the world is to conform to how they want the world to be, and in the world that they and their public lives in, that becomes the reality. My country is governed by three prominent fantasists. This man who runs our health department, telling people that fluoride is dangerous or measles vaccines are unnecessary. So we see in the United States the return of measles, a disease that we thought we had eradicated in the general public just 20 years ago. Or this man that's just endless number of examples of things that he just says and makes up, and his public continues to follow and believe because that's what they want to see. Or this extraordinary figure, which, of course, engages in endless crazy talk, or at least crazy talk for us, no connection to reality, or at least to our reality, to my bespoke reality, and just for the record, my bespoke reality is real. Okay, but the point is the consequence. The consequence of this increasing engagement with media is that we live in these bubbles cemented with hate. We, the people, become we, the polarized, ignorant, and angry. And we have to remember this is AI. This is the algorithmic feeds that Sam was talking about. And this is the AI we need to focus on, because the point is, this is not about technology. This is about a business model. This is the byproduct of a business model. That business model deploys AI. AI gets what it seeks, which is our engagement. But we get a democracy hacked, a business model. Now, of course, it's not new to say that media has a business model. You know, when I was a kid, this was, well, not quite that old, but the point is, broadcast was the business model I was born into. And broadcast, of course, all broadcast is important, but the most important broadcast in the history of America was television, as Marcus Pryor puts it. Television changed everything about American democracy, not just because of how concentrated the audiences were. As late as 1977, 90% of Americans said they got their news from 3 national networks. But also because of the addictiveness of the technology. It became irresistible. But because it was video, it was understandable, it was therefore egalitarian, therefore more citizens were engaged in mainstream trusted sources as they came to understand the issues the nation needed to decide. That was broadcast democracy. That was the democracy that brought Richard Nixon down. All of that changed with the introduction of this technology, cable. This graph captures that change. The dark bars are the big 3 networks, which in 1985 had almost 70% market share. And by 2002, that's below 40% of the attention spent watching television. And then the white bars are cable penetration. So in 1985, just over 40% have access to cable television. By 2002, more than 82% have access to cable television. And then the line is the average number of channels delivered by this cable television platform. So in the beginning, it's 13 channels, and by the end, it's over 100 channels. So when you add that all together, the point is we move from a country where all of us are watching one of 3 shows to a country where we are watching endless number of shows at any one time, producing fierce competition by these content providers to give us what we want. Now, at first, what they tried to do was to take the model of old media and just multiply it, like have lots of different entities providing the same kind of content. But then that changed pretty fundamentally. And the person who drove that change is this man, Roger Ailes. Now, Roger Ailes began his career as a media man for Richard Nixon. And Nixon once famously said to Roger Ailes, "What I need is a Pravda." Because Nixon looked at Brezhnev and was admiring the fact that Brezhnev had a constant echo of what he was saying in the public. And Nixon thought, that would be a cool thing to have. And Roger Ailes agreed. And so Roger Ailes, in the middle of the 1990s, joins a company called Fox News. It's an extraordinary story of this birth told in this television show.
The idea of this series is to tell the story of the creation of Fox News, which addresses conservative America. And there's a great scene right at the beginning of the series where Rupert Murdoch wants Roger Ailes to run the show, but he's brought in his best Australian team to try to explain to him what he wants to do with this new channel.
Fox News will be programmed for the 90s. Fast, loud, edgy. Tabloid TV.
And Ailes famously said, wrong.
Cable is about one thing, niche.
And what is that niche?
Well, I think it is conservatives. We're just going to give the people what they want. Positive message, an American message, wrapped up in a conservative viewpoint. That's hearts and minds right there.
It's good work, Roger.
Give people what they want. Niche. So you go from a business model of news, which is to tell the story in a way that everybody could listen, where a news anchor like Walter Cronkite could end every broadcast by saying, that's the way it is, on January 4th, 1972. To a form of news where the objective is not to tell the story in a way that everybody would agree or understand or want to hear, but to tell the story to your niche. And this graph, which is, I think, maybe the most terrifying I'm going to show you, describes the consequence of this. So as late as 2001, the three major cable networks, CNN, Fox News, and NBC, the ideological content of what their news is broadcasting is essentially the same. But in the period since 2001, it veers dramatically, as all of them learn that the profitable way to be a news channel is to do as Roger Ailes said, find your niche, and to broadcast to that niche, and to take that niche with you, for you to be their identity. So the key is giving them what they want, but the insight is what they want is not what democracy needs. Because as you give them what they want, you create a public less capable of understanding the common problems that we face as a common nation or common people. Okay, so the point is, it was already bad before the internet came along. But what Sam is talking about, these algorithmic feeds, make it infinitely worse. And that's the sense in which he is obviously right. These algorithmic feeds are the first at-scale misaligned AIs. Okay, here's how or why he is wrong. At-scale misaligned AIs? Misaligned? In what sense are they misaligned? Because what is the objective of these AIs? The objective is the engagement business model. So the question alignment theorists should ask is the result aligned with the engagement business model, the business model of these platforms? And the answer to that question is, of course it is. The engagement business model aims to make the public engaged, however it brings that about, and that's exactly what it does. Now, these companies recognize the consequence of making the public engaged like this. It's an extraordinary memo by Andrew Bosworth, who was CTO of Facebook, as we entered the 2020 election. And at the end of 2019, he wrote a memo to the whole Facebook staff, because the Facebook staff was struggling with the recognition that the 2016 election, when Donald Trump was elected president, because of the weird way our electoral college works, Facebook employees feared that their technology platform had helped bring about that result. So Andrew Bosworth was trying to explain to his employees Facebook's relationship to this truth. And he invoked the the story from Salt, Sugar, Fat. So in Salt, Sugar, Fat, Moss describes how certain executives in the processed food industry increasingly came to recognize that their product was poisonous, that it was making America unhealthy. So some of them said, what if we start making healthy processed food? So they started doing that. Kraft Foods started producing this healthy processed food. And what happened is the public hated it. So executives were fired, the companies went back to their old ways, and things were happy on Wall Street. So here's a snippet from Bosworth's letter. What I expect people will find is that algorithms are primarily exposing the desires of humanity itself for better or worse. This is a, well, he says sugar, salt, fat, but it's salt, sugar, fat problem. The book of that name tells a story ostensibly about food, but in reality about the limited effectiveness of, quote, corporate paternalism. A while ago, Kraft Foods had a leader who tried to reduce the sugar they sold in the interest of consumer health, but consumers wanted sugar. So instead, he ended up just reducing Kraft's market share. Health outcomes didn't improve. The CEO lost his job. The new CEO introduced quadruple stuffed Oreos, and the company returned to grace. Giving people tools to make their own decisions is good, but trying to force decisions upon them rarely works for them or for you, employees of Facebook. At the end of the day, we are forced to ask what responsibility individuals have for themselves. Set aside substances that directly alter neurochemistry unnaturally, make costs and trade-offs as transparent as possible. But beyond that, each of us must take responsibility for ourselves. If I want to eat sugar and die an early death, that is a valid position. My grandfather took such a stance towards bacon, and I admired him for it. And social media is likely much less fatal than bacon. Is it? Not sure really my child has suffered as much from bacon as from social media. But here's the point. He's telling us that it's not a Facebook problem. It's a democracy problem, but not a Facebook problem. Even if the corporation itself is producing the incentives that drive people into this corner of destructive democracy, it's not a Facebook problem. So it might be misaligned socially, it might be misaligned democratically, but it's perfectly corporately aligned. The engagement business model is privately beneficial, but publicly not. It's publicly demos destroying. Now, what drives me nuts about this, when you see it like this, is that it is just a business model. Right? Like if you told me we had to destroy democracy to end climate change, I wouldn't agree with you, but I would understand what you're saying. Or if you said we have to end democracy to end world hunger, again, I wouldn't agree with you, but I'd at least understand the point you're trying to make. But the idea that we're going to destroy democracy to make these guys richer, I don't even understand what you're saying anymore. It is no sense at all that we allow this business model to have this effect with no effective regulation anywhere, including in the EU. Okay, so what is to be done? Not sure if you've seen this really fantastic movie or series of movies now, The Quiet Place. It's a story of these aliens who invade, and they are extremely powerful, voracious eaters, but they have one particular handicap: they can't see. They only can hear. So quickly, humanity learns that the only way it can survive is to be completely silent. So they move life underground and live life silent because this alien intelligence has taken over their world. This is a tragic scene. I'm not going to show you what happens in this scene as he is not silent with his airplane, and the father realizes, too late, the consequence of that non-silence. Okay, the point is, this is the same story for us. An AI has invaded not an alien intelligence, but an artificial intelligence. The flood is happening, and we need to move. We need to move to higher ground, to protected ground. We have to find a way to insulate democracy, to shelter democracy from AI's force, from AI's harmful force. Big admirer of David von Raybroek's book, Against Elections. His book begins with this recognition. He says, for almost 3,000 years, people have been experimenting with democracy, and in only the last 200 years have they practiced it exclusively by holding elections. This fact is changing. And at the core of that change is a movement organized around citizen assemblies. Citizen assemblies are random, representative, informed, and deliberated bodies that take on some difficult issue. They are, because they are this, a protected form of democracy. They are complementing, not replacing, representative forms of democracy. So after the financial crisis, Iceland convened a random representative 1,000-person body to come up with the principles that it should inform the drafting of a new constitution. They then elected a constitutional council that then created a beautiful new constitution for Iceland, which the public then, in a referendum by more than 2/3, said the government should adopt as the basis of a new constitution. The parliament ignored them, but the point is they produced something in this protected democracy way. Ireland is regularly demonstrating the incredible value of a citizen assembly movement, which has taken on issues which the Irish parliament could never have addressed, like abortion or same-sex marriage, and produced results which then were taken to referendum and passed at higher percentages than the citizen assembly itself recommended, every year now taking on issues like this to complement the ordinary representative democracy process. France has done something related to climate and now end of life, and of course here too you have embraced the process of citizen assemblies to address issues that maybe the politicians don't want to take up. None of these are perfect, but all of them are extraordinarily hopeful as a process for finding what we the people might believe that is less corrupted by this influence of this new AI. And, or I would say not even and, I want to say but. The point is, this is not just a good idea, not just one new clever idea by academics about how we could do some tweak on democracy. It's not just a new idea that we complement with, it is existential. Protected democracy is existential for democracy itself, because we must come to accept that there is no way to beat this engagement business model right now. This is a business model that's against democracy. The AI that built this can't spell against, but the point is, it's a business model against democracy. When in our history has the infrastructure of media, public media, had as its own self-interest the consequence of destroying democracy? That's what this business model has as its objective indirectly through engagement. We must find a way to move beyond that, and we must move now. Now, if I were a non-American and I went back to America, I might not be able to get through my border now that I put this up on the screen, but you get the point here. Okay, let me just end with one more thought. I come from the land of Trump, but I'm proud to say I come from the kingdom of Harvard. And the motto of Harvard, it's almost like this was a Hollywood script, right? The motto of Harvard is veritas, truth. Truth, that is the motto. And in the activity around the struggles that Harvard now has because of this administration's hatred of Harvard, indeed, hatred of Harvard, the most moving event that I attended was an event where 3 foreign students spoke, including one Austrian student who spoke. And this Austrian student said to the hundreds that were gathered at this protest, he said, "We grew up being taught the stages of fascism. We learned every stage a country goes through on the path to fascism." And he said, you are going through those stages now. Everyone in the audience was like me right now. We needed to learn, we needed to be reminded again of the truth that Karl was uttering. And so, yes, that's what we're suffering now. But yes, and we have a concept in America, in the English-speaking world, of the idea of the canary in the coal mine. GPT somehow put the canary both in the cage and out of the cage, but forget that for now. But the idea of the canary in the coal mine is that coal miners would bring canaries down into the mine, and the canaries would die if there was gas before it would kill the human, so they knew they needed to get out. So yes, you can teach us about the past and the steps to fascism that are being replicated right now in the United States, but I'm here to tell you we are the canary for your future. Because this is not a US problem. This is not just a US problem. The dynamic I'm describing is an all of us problem. And if we can't unite as scholars, as academics, as members of a public in addressing that problem, this idea, this fancy, this blip in history of democracy will soon quickly pass. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to do questions now, or?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Does anybody want to ask something? The plan was like right after each. Yeah. Do we have someone with a microphone?
Yeah. Thank you for this very depressing talk. I really liked your idea about using deliberative bodies like randomly selected representative bodies to deal with this problem. But the thing is, like the Klimarat was the Austrian Klimarat was very, very insistent on the fact that we need to do something. But afterwards, it was just ignored. So I'm wondering whether you think that a consulting body, instead of a body that can actually decide on laws, can help with this issue.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a complicated transition that has to happen. And the first transition is that the public needs to come to believe that these randomly selected representative bodies are any good at something. Because most people, if you say, I'm just going to pick a random group of Americans and have them think about important issues, would say, are you nuts? Because they don't have a conception of what random representative means. They think random, they think the random guy they see on television is talking some malarkey about something. So the first thing is to give people a sense that they are as magical as they are. And so that's why I think often you see them stood up in this way that has no direct, obvious power. They just have persuasive authority. But the obvious problem with that is governments are likely not to follow them. So in Iceland, even though the thing that this process produced, more than 2/3 endorsed, the parliament just ignored it. And here's where the trick of Ireland is so important. What Ireland did was not have an exclusively citizen panel. 1/3 of the members of this random representative body were members of parliament. So parliament itself became invested in the process, which made it easier for the politicians to eventually accept what had happened. Now, France, like Austria, saw fantastic ideas around climate change effectively ignored by the parliament. I don't think that means there's a reason to give up. I think there's a reason to demand something more significant next time around. To say, like, let's see what the public's view of this process is. And the reports I read about the Austria process says that people, more than half of the public knew about it. That's pretty extraordinary. In America, we could run the same thing and maybe 2% would know about it. So the fact that half of Austria knew about it and begins to understand what the process involves, I think is the first step to giving it the public's authority, and then leverage the public authority to democratic legislative authority would be the next step.
There was another question.
Larry,
Yeah.
great talk. Thank you. I have 2 comments and 1 question. So one comment is, I'm sure you know the Chilean case, where 78% of the people wanted to have a new constitution, and they failed because they did it too liberal or too conservative. So it's not an easy problem. The second comment is that it's not only democracy. I mean, China had the first regulation on generative AI in 2023 because they know it's also a risk for their regime. So it's any regime, not only democracy, AI is affecting. And the question is, you gave these excellent examples where you have one reality and things went down in all things, but in the new reality, the things are still the same. So they're indistinguishable. If you see, you don't know if there's a one reality or multiple realities. How we distinguish how many realities we have?
Well, I think it's important to just recognize that this period of time when we lived within one reality is like a blip in human history, right? Like it's, in Europe, it's more significant because you had the propaganda use of radio much more effectively than in the United States. And so that's why in countries like Germany, they hate the idea of this kind of broadcast reality. In the United States, our first great broadcaster was FDR, and so we kind of like the idea of broadcast reality. But the point is, whether it's 40 years or 80 years, that's a tiny slice of human history. And we need to recognize it's never coming back. We're never going to create a world where we're all watching the same shows anymore. That's just not how you can run democracy. So if I had another 2 hours, I could tell you how it was that we ran democracy before, like why that was possible. It wasn't great, but the point is it was possible. But that's no longer possible now. That model of democracy before broadcast, the 19th century model of democracy, is just not possible now. So we've got to figure out what kind of democracy is possible given the technology now. I think there is. But I think the populism movement is largely about people being deeply skeptical that there is. Like, so either, you have a common view, it's not working, but what are you going to do? Well, we can hand it over to a strong man, which we have, or hand it over to a bunch of technocrats, which we never will, because they're from Harvard, or hand it over to us, properly represented, deliberated, informed. And I would trust us 100% of the time in that way. Much more than representative legislatures, much more than experts from Harvard, much more than any other solution. I would trust us. We just need to demonstrate to people that we, in this form, have something to say. Now again, I'm not of the view that we should hand government over to citizen assemblies. Because the hard part in governing is not figuring out whether people like education or like good roads or like a clean infrastructure. Of course we like those 3 things. The hard thing of governance is to figure out how to trade off among those 3 things, and that requires a bigger scope than any citizen assembly is ever going to have. So that's why we need an infrastructure of governance. But I think that there's something really powerful in finding a way to reach what we the people believe without necessarily all the time passing through these representative elected members. Not because I'm against them. I think, I have enormous respect for people who devote their life to public service in that way, because especially in America, it's a miserable life. So you do it, you're either something wrong with you or you're really devoted to the country, and I'm willing to believe it's because you're really devoted to the country. But there's a better way to get to our views, and we ought to start practicing it and demonstrating it, because AI is forcing us to.
Okay, Thank you. I see there are a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we cannot take them right now because we have to move on a little bit. I have to look at the time. I suggest we finish this session right now and we take the questions afterwards. And I thank you.
Yes, thank you.
For the moment. He's one of the best-known computer scientists of today. He's the Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor in Computational Engineering at Rice University. He authored or co-authored more than, I think, 800 papers, mostly on the fields of logic and theoretical computer science. He's the recipient of several scientific awards, a fellow of several societies, and a member of many national and international academies of sciences. Too many to be listed here. Moshe also holds honorary doctorates from 8 universities, but he's not only an outstanding computer scientist, he also points out the negative social and political impacts of information technology and computer science. He has been one of the key figures of the Digital Humanism Initiative from the very beginning. So please welcome him, and Moshe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's great to be here. As a point of, let me just relate to Larry's talk. So Vardi is a Hebrew name, comes from rose, but it's also a British name. And the British name Vardi, there is a soccer player, famous soccer player called Vardi, comes from Veritas. So you'll see that Larry is a legal scholar. I'm just a nerd, but we are in violent agreement. But let me start with a quote from a recent article in Foreign Affairs by Michael Beckley. Very just early beginning. So remember, this is January 25. I mean, the article was written even before Trump became president, right? By all appearances, the United States is a mess. 2/3 of Americans believe the country is on the wrong track. And nearly 70% rate the economy is not good or poor. Public trust in government is falling by half, from 40% in 2000 to just 20% today. Love of the country is fading too, with only 38% of America now saying patriotism is very important, down from 70% in 2000. Congressional polarization has reached its highest point since Reconstruction, and the threats of violence against politicians have surged. And one question I want to ask is, what happened? What went wrong? And the key thing that points out is the reason why the United States is barely functioning country right now is polarization. So this is from 2022, a poll by New York Times about Donald Trump. 92% of Democrats think he threatened U.S. democracy by this election stolen lies, but 76% of Republicans think he was exercising his right to contest the election. About guns. So this is about banning what's called assault type rifles. Okay, this is just after the Uvalde massacre in Texas, where 19 children and 2 teachers were murdered. Among gun owners, among Democratic gun owners, 84% are in favor of such a ban. Among Republican gun owners, 75% are against such a ban. And when you have society it's so deeply polarized, democracy cannot function. Because democracy is kind of a game, and you have to trust each other. Okay, we win this time, you lose last time. Without trust, things cannot function. This is an article that George Bush wrote just a couple of months before he passed away at age over 100. When trust was in the room, good things happened. When trust was not in the room, good things did not happen. Everything else is detail. And right now, polarization means no trust. So what happened? I want to go back to 1981, where I think 3 pivotal events happens. Number 1, a young postdoc arrived at Stanford University. Well, he was at least pivotal to that young postdoc. But just a month before that, IBM introduced the IBM Personal Computer Model 5150. Nobody remember, it was known as the IBM PC. And earlier in the year, Ronald Reagan became president. The IBM PC was a smashing success. Within just over a year later, Time magazine put it on its cover, the machine of the year. The computer moves in. Time magazine usually puts the person of the year. Well, it used to be the man of the year, then it became the person of the year, and then it became the machine of the year. And to me, the introduction of the PC is the beginning of a tsunami of technology. The world we live in today started really with the introduction of the IBM PC. Because by the mid-80s, every knowledge worker has a computer on their desk at work. By the late 80s, the knowledge worker took the computer home. So when the World Wide Web was introduced in 1989, everybody had access to it. Internet became commercial in 1995. That enabled the launch of Google, Facebook, the iPhone. So you see how this tsunami of technology created the world we live in today. And it started with the IBM PC. But very often what we neglect to realize that this period completely overlapped with the tsunami of neoliberalism that Ronald Reagan unleashed on the United States. So generally, neoliberalism, some people call it late stage capitalism, but neoliberalism, I think, is a better term, is radical free market capitalism. Economic liberalization, austerity, privatization, regulation, monetarism, tax reduction, globalization, free trade. And it was, Ronald Reagan pushed the country so hard to the right, the Democrats had to follow. So by 1996, Bill Clinton, in his second State of the Union addresses, the era of big government is over. When I ask people who said that, most people think it's Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton. The Democrats had to move over. Similar thing happened, they're called New Democrats. Similar thing happened in the UK, New Labour. Now, underlying new liberalism is the belief in the magical power of the invisible hand. And that phrase goes back to Adam Smith, not the wealth of nation, actually the theory of moral sentiments, explaining what the beauty of the market, they are led by an invisible hand. And so without intending it, without knowing it, advance the interests of society as a whole and provide means for the survival of the species. So markets are magical. And the ideology that comes out of it is each one of us can be selfish, completely self-interested, and somehow society will be better off. And so by the time you have the movie Wall Street, you have a character in the movie, Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko, and he gives a fiery speech. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of better word, is good. Greed is right. Adam Smith says so, invisible hand. So how well did the invisible hand work for the United States? So we talked about polarization, and we talked about cognitive polarization. But it really starts with income polarization, with economic polarization. So you see here what happened. If you look here, this is the top 1% versus the bottom 50%. And you see in 1962, the bottom 50% take about 20% of the income, and the top 1% about 13% of the income. And you see a reversal over the next 50 years. More and more of the income goes to the top 1% and less to the bottom 50%. And you see a similar story with wealth. You saw how the wealth of the top 1% end up exceeding the wealth of what's called the middle class, which is everything between the 20th percentile and the 80th percentile. So we see an economy that boomed, but only the top 1% has really benefited from it. Now, the argument that underlies it is that of economic efficiency. So what is economic efficiency? So you can go to Investopedia and learn a lot about economics there. Economic efficiency means that goods and production of factors of production are allocated to the most valuable use of and waste is minimized. And the free market ideology says that free market advocates argue that through individual self-interest and freedom of production as well as consumption, economic efficiency is achieved and the best interests of society as a whole are fulfilled. So the argument is we should pursue efficiency, and that's the holy grail to everything else. And in fact, in 2008, after the financial crisis, I decided I need to learn a little more economics. So I started reading, and my fellow economist, economist colleague told me, go read about the welfare theorem. So I went and read the first welfare theorem, which is one of the most fundamental theorems in economics. And it says basically that under a certain technical assumption, a free market will tend towards a competitive, Pareto optimal equilibrium. Pareto optimal means that no one can gain unless someone else loses. And the economy says that's a definition of efficiency. Pareto optimality is efficiency. So now we can ask the question, okay, this is efficiency, but does it really optimize for society? And interestingly, this question was raised not by economists, surprisingly, by computer scientists, who, Christopher Dimitri, who likes to use what he calls use the lens of computation on outside of computer science, together with Kotsopias. And they said, look, there are many possible equilibria. Here they look at Nash equilibrium, but the same thing is true for Pareto optimal equilibria. There are many possible equilibria. Let's look at the equilibrium that's best for society, and let's look at the equilibrium that's worse for society and compare them. And it turned out that the worst can be much, much, much worse than the best equilibrium. And this is called the price of anarchy, because there's no guiding hand. There's no saying, well, the market will converge. So the idea is that the market rate social optimum is pure fantasy. It's just mathematically not sound. Now I'll go back and rehash some of the ideas of what we heard in the previous presentation. So I remember I arrived at Stanford in 1981, only to discover that the atmosphere was still that of the 60s. And that atmosphere was very anti-establishment. Government, they didn't like government. There was the Vietnam War, people were very against the government, and people didn't think about corporate power. I'll come back to that. But the government was dangerous. So they were worried about government involvement, and therefore the mantra became information wants to be free. Now, by the end of the decade, the World Wide Web comes out, and Tim Berners-Lee's idea was unfettered access to information. But we quickly discovered there's too much information. We can't consume it all. We have to somehow get access to information. And people forget, this was ideas. How do we get access to information? Yahoo, first to say, how do you find books in the library? There is a catalog. Let's have a catalog for the internet. Of course, it couldn't scale as fast as the internet was growing. Then search engine came about. And the early ones were bad. Google had a fantastic search engine, and now you have a multi-trillion-dollar corporation. But remember, information wants to be free. So what's the business model? How do you make money? The answer was advertising. So advertising on the internet, people discover quickly, is not very effective. You know, if a newspaper, unless you're doing something very targeted, classified, if you want to get someone's attention, you put a big banner. People hated banners. There used to be periods where people put big banners, but people hated it. Consumed too much screen. So a new idea came. It was a genius idea, micro-targeted advertising. We're going to learn about you, and we're going to feed you what we think you're going to click and see. And that created what Larry described as the filter bubble. And here is what Salon Magazine actually ran experiments. Let's ask a question. What is Exxon? And let's see, when you click on the pages, what kind of advertisement you see. And it took two different kind of users. One that has a liberal profile, and one that was a conservative profile. And the liberal saw nice advertisement about carbon sequestrations, and the conservative saw advertisements about against economic regulation. So what you see is what they think you want to see. And Facebook took it under this idea of maximum user engagement to the next level. But it was not just about showing you what you want, but shaping your behavior. And one way that Facebook shapes our behavior, and this was an idea that came from Stanford psychologists, giving us likes. Because like is a symbol of social approval. We all crave social approval. And people have talked, it's called addiction by design. That people are addicted to say, oh, how many likes did I get? How many likes did I get? And the result of this, we end up living in this filter bubble. And by April 2022, Jonathan Haidt wrote in The Atlantic about the past 10 years. And he wrote, the story of bubble is the best metaphor I have found for what happened in America in the 2010s and for the fractured country we now inhabit. Something went terribly wrong very suddenly. We are disoriented, unable to speak the same language or recognize the same truth. We are cut off from one another and from the past. But it's not just that we are seeing different information on social media. It's worse than that. Information shapes us. It changes our preferences in a way that's very hard to see. Now today, the way we consume information, Most of it, yes, we still watch TV, we still read newspaper. Most of the information we get access to is through the internet. Now, you may want to type http://www.cs.right.edu/tilde-Vardi, and you'll find my homepage. Most likely, you're not going to do it. You're going to just Google me, right? Now, here is what's not widely known. About 5 years ago, there was a battle royale, a huge battle inside Google. How to rank search results. And there were two camps. There was a pro-user camp. The pro-user camp says, we will rank the search result what we think are the user's interest. The other camp says, no, we should rank the search result according to what's best for Google, because we can estimate advertising revenue. So there was the good intentions camp and a money for Google camp. Who do you think won? What a shocker. What a shocker. So that is to say, we are influenced by 1,000 nudges without being aware of it, because what we see shapes us. And as a computer scientist, I'm having my Ender's Game moment. So Ender's Game was a novel, science fiction novel from the mid-'80s. My son was a teenager. He was hard to talk to, so I said, I'll read his book so we can discuss his books. And he described teenagers who think they are playing video games, not realizing they're actually fighting intergalactic war. And when they won the game, they actually won the war, and they've destroyed the civilization. And so now we are computer scientists. We thought ourselves as the good guys. We thought ourselves in the Star Wars metaphors as the rebels, only to discover that, no, we are the empire. What do we do with that? So there's a lot of talk today in computer science about responsibility. Responsible AI is the new buzzwords. Responsibility implies accountability. AI is not accountable. AI is just code. And the idea is that you assign response is anthropomorphizing the code. AI is not responsible. In fact, I did some research on the history of the term responsible AI. It started in data science, and the first phrase was data science response, responsibly. Then it became AI responsibly. Marketing people says, we need a noun. We can't use AI responsibly. So they make it into responsible AI. That's how we got responsible AI. People talk about corporation with social responsibility. I'd like to see the corporation that sacrifice $1 billion in profits because of social responsibility. If you know anyone, just let me know. I'm still waiting. But we should be responsible. We are computing professionals, at least not everybody here, but us, those who are computer professionals. You can go to the ACM Code of Ethics, and this is the first sentence. Computer professional actions change the world. To act responsibly, they should reflect on the wider impact of their work, consistently supporting the public good. So, if you want to be a responsible computer scientist, you should support the public good. Now, I started talking public good a few years ago, and some of the reaction on social media was, you must be Marxist-Leninist. Who else is talking about public good? Who else? The US Constitution. That's how it starts. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So the purpose of the United States as a country is to promote the public good. The rest of the Constitution is a mechanism by which a large country reaches some consensus. What is the public good? And how to do it is a matter of ongoing evolution. But the main point of the Constitution, the responsibility of the state, not of the market, to promote the public good. Now, it's not always easy to follow what is the public good. In this audience, we may have many different ideas, you know. We all agree that thou shalt not kill is a moral imperative, but then there are qualifications, you know, we can debate about death penalty, self-defense, just war, things are complicated. But sometimes you look at it in our industry, sometimes it's almost black and white. So in 2019, Jacobin magazine wrote, from the start, Uber's business model has been based on habitual criminality and shocking indifference to human life. Now, Jacobin magazine is very left-wing, so maybe you want to dismiss it. But by 2022, more than 100,000 documents were leaked. This was the Uber documents, and Guardian wrote, Uber broke laws do police and secret lobby governments leak reveal. So Jacobin magazine was completely right. And so people who work for Uber need to ask themselves the questions, are we serving the public good? And I'm an educator. What is my responsibility? I claim that my responsibility is to produce students. I cannot make them responsible, but I should at least talk to them about social responsibility. It's my social responsibility to talk to computer science students about their social responsibility. It must be part of the curriculum. Now we try to think, no, we should just teach computer science. That, in my opinion, is irresponsible. And I urge you to look at the paper I wrote with some colleagues, Deep Tech Ethics. Now we live today in an area that I think Edward O. Wilson, the noted biologist, wrote about it. He said, the true point of humanity is the following. With Paleolithic emotions, our emotions had developed through evolutions. Modernity is a very, very short thing compared to the long run of evolution. Medieval institutions, we talked about democracy, how we make it difficult for us to operate, and the technology of gods. I would paraphrase it. It's even worse, because I think today's technology is taking advantage of our Paleolithic emotions and medieval institutions. We're being taken advantage of. And so BMW used to have the slogan, the ultimate driving machines. But now they're being threatened by autonomous vehicles, so they changed their slogan. And now they say, don't be driven by technology, drive it. And that's why we launched the Digital Humanism Initiative, and we wrote the manifesto in May of 2019. And I want to read just one sentence. We must shape technology in accordance with human values and needs, instead of allowing technology to shape humans. Our task is not only to run the downside of information communication technologies, but to encourage human-centered innovation. In fact, I think that the Technical University of Vienna had a motto, technology for people, which I like very much. And now, whenever Time magazine puts technology on its cover, we should take it seriously. And this is the cover from January, I think, of 2024. And it put, you see, there's a conversation with ChatGPT. And I like this cartoon. So you see a box labeled AI, a monster is coming out, and the guy is reading the packing slip and says, who the hell is Pandora? So what have we unleashed on the world? And the main promise of AI is efficiency. So here is a bunch of headlines and titles I got from publication. How generative AI can boost highly skilled workers' productivity. AI is boosting workplace efficiency. AI revolution business efficiency. AI lift workers to new heights of efficiency. On and on and on. So efficiency sounds like a good thing, right? But if you want to understand the United States and perhaps other parts of the world, one thing you need to look at is a measure that is not widely known. It's called labor force participation. What you usually read is about unemployment. But unemployment means what percent of people who are looking for a job are not finding a job. So unemployment can go down in two ways. More people finding jobs, or fewer people looking for jobs. Labor force participation measures how many people are working or looking for a job. They're in the workforce. And what you see here is, if you look at the picture for the whole population, it kind of muddied because of the fact that women start joining the workforce in the 60s, 70s. But if you look what happened to men, you see a significant drop in labor force participation. And there's a big difference between when women are not working and men are not working. When women are not working, it usually means they're working, but not getting paid for it. They're taking care of someone young or someone old. When men are not working, they're playing video games. That's the reality. So why did the labor force participation decline, which is horrendous consequences for society? Lots of very unhappy men. So a paper from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond in 2021, much of the decline is due to increased technology, automation, and import competition. Technology, efficiency. Automation, efficiency. Free trade, efficiency. So the big worry is AI is now increasing efficiency, that old-style automation eliminated working-class job. Now can expect to see a wave of automation eliminating, I would say, low-skill, white-collar jobs. Okay? Today, if you are A lawyer, probably your job is not in danger. But if you're a paralegal, I would not bet on your job being there in 5 years. In fact, even programming is a job now. In fact, there was just a headline I saw about which major has the highest unemployment statistic right now, computer science. And one of the worries that people had about AI was superintelligence. What happens not only if we reach AGI, artificial general intelligence, but if we reach superintelligence. Nick Bostrom, a philosopher from Oxford, wrote a book about this in 2012, and he invented the paperclip thought experiment. You tell a superintelligent agent, make paperclips. So it will want to maximize this. So we'll figure out how to turn the whole solar system into a paperclip factory. Humanity is be damned. Well, we have such a creature. It's called the modern corporation. It is super intelligent because it brings together the brain power of sometimes of tens of thousands of people, and it tries to maximize one thing, profit. It's a business model. It's a business model uber alles. In fact, this was, if you read about Facebook is an example. Jeff Horowitz wrote a book, Broken Code 2023. The chief executive and his trusted lieutenants have chosen to maximize growth and engagement over any other objective. So I think our biggest challenge right now is dealing with corporate power. So we had, I think it was here in one of the workshops we had here a couple of years ago, and we talked about antitrust. So the traditional argument for antitrust was, and Tim Wood discovered it in The Curse of Bigness, Antitrust in the New Gilded Age, was very much about consumer harm. But now we're dealing with a strange business model where things seem to be free. So Ziffer Techout said, no, there's another argument, which is that too much concentration of power is bad for democracy. And one of the reasons why representative democracy is not working is because the amount of lobbying that multi-trillion companies can bring to politics. And I very much like what Kate Crawford said. Stop talking about the AI ethics. It's time to talk about power. The issue right now is who has power. And so we have to bust tech power. And there is one way that the tech exercise power over us, which is almost invisible. We have two legal systems. There's no normal legal system. Well, laws are passed by legislatures. It's very imperfect. And maybe we don't always get the laws we want. But at least it is transparent. But when it comes to technology, all of you have something in your pocket, and your life is governed not by normal law, by the terms of the licenses that you all signed by clicking through. And all these laws have been written by corporate lawyers, and none of them are thinking about you. So I think, first of all, if we want to reclaim power, we have to do something about all these licenses. I mean, I propose this very, very simple law. I don't know it's going to be passed. Maybe Citizens Assembly will pass it. All click-through contracts, past, present, future, are hereby nullified. So I'll modify Kate Crawford. Stop talking about responsible AI. It's time to talk about corporate power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A few questions. Yeah.
Mike.
So I realized a very interesting fact in one of the charts you showed, which was that this diverge like of the 1% wealth and the bottom 50% wealth, they start really gaining steep or like getting steep in the beginning of the 80s. And you talked about the introduction of the first widely used PC. Is it just by accident, or what is there some kind of deep correlation between the digitalization of the world and the concentration of wealth in some way? Like, not that it's destiny that it is like this, but how did it play out?
So I think that one of these cosmic coincidence of history, that's what I had to say. There is just, it's a coincidence of history. But in the neoliberal age, and the computer age, starting with IBM PC, just happened to be at the same year. Ronald Reagan is elected as president, Margaret Thatcher preceding him slightly in 1979, and then the IBM PC in 1981. This, only God decided this should be happening about the same time. But we're sitting inside our computing bubble. We don't realize this ability also of the industry to do everything with no regulation. This is very much the legacy of the neoliberal age. And to this very day, and I insist, you go back to even to the mentality of Silicon Valley that goes back, we don't think of this, it goes back to the hippies, very anti-government, okay? So first information wants to be free, and then the next mantra became regulation will stifle innovation. And they're still fighting a huge fight against any regulation. Now the states are trying to regulate, and now they're trying to lobby Congress to slow down regulation by the states. Europe is trying to regulate, so now they're trying to threaten using tariff to fight against European regulation. They don't want regulation. They want to be able to do whatever they want to do. And so this combination of technology, but in something about a whole new force, this is a whole new force unleashed on the world with no regulation. This combination, that's kind of what happened together. And there's no question when you look where the wealth is generated, much of it is generated in the tech world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk.
Speak closer to the mic. No, it's okay, just speak close. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. I have one question for you and one for Lawrence Lessig. On the business issue, you are using the T word, tariffs, from Trump, but you're not using the T word for democracy, which is taxes. One of the things which led to the global concentration of the IT industry is that they are evading taxes left, right, and center. We have a digital tax in Europe. What do you think in terms of would be an appropriate tax measure in the US and anywhere else? And for Lawrence, or for Larry, it would be good to think about digital tools for democracy. We are putting a Learn Forum on in Vienna in September to basically look also at counter technologies. Do you have 2 or 3 examples of efficient counter technologies which you would think would strengthen your argument of empowering citizens and citizen movements? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So taxes, the question was, why do we see such growing concentration of wealth? And it's very clear that this goes back to Ronald Reagan reducing taxes, and then Donald Trump in his first term also reduced taxes. The argument is always this reduced taxation will lead to economic growth, but that's almost never materialized. Mostly it ends up as a deficit spending. So when the left does it, it's a bad thing because you're increasing the deficit. But when then you increase deficit spending by reducing taxes, suddenly it's okay to have deficit, and then the money does not flow evenly around. Does not flow evenly around the country, and we've seen that. And it's getting worse because there are more and more ways to avoid paying taxes. There are all kinds of tax avoidance jurisdictions. And there was an attempt to have like a global minimum taxation treaty that in fact, I think the United States had signed it, but it was never approved by Congress, I believe. So taxation is a big part of it, which is taxation was always a way to make sure that the economic benefits flow to the population in general, is not concentrated among the 1%. I think the other question was to Larry.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
So obviously I agree with 99% of what you said, Yoshi. It's wonderful to see you again echoing. I'm happy to echo what you're saying. But the taxation point too, we could solve the social media problem overnight with taxation. Imagine something like a quadratic engagement tax that basically starts at $1 for 1 unit, $4 for 2 units, $9 for 3 units. Very soon your phone would say, can you go take a walk, please? You're costing us too much money for the amount of time you're spending. So we could do that overnight, but we don't have a functioning government in the United States. There's absolutely no way. You're not even allowed to use the word tax in Washington, D.C. So there's just no possibility, and that's because of the corruption of our political system through money, and it's my whole other part of my life is fighting the money and politics problem. But as to technology, so yes, Harvard has acquired a platform called Chasm, which is a online video deliberation platform, and we have open sourced it, and we are now pushing online video deliberation tools into 1 million different contexts to complement citizen assemblies, but not just. So I think there are lots of obvious ways in which technology could help, but I think we have to embrace the idea that we're not going to collectivism our way into utopia. Like, we've got to just gather together as people in real space and do things looking at others face to face, meeting them in the eyes. The greatest thing about citizen assemblies is when you get really diverse groups of people together, you discover the other side is not a bunch of reptiles. They actually have children, they have dreams, they have hopes, they have the same ideals for what they want their future to be. They just have different assumptions. And the only way we break through that is to practice citizenship, and that is physical, face-to-face engagement. And so I love technology, obviously, but I think we've got to give up the idea that that's enough.
Thank you.
So building up on it, there was an experience 2 years ago in Houston. There was a panel not at Rice, in the Asian Center about hate speech on the internet. And people ask why there is so much hate speech on the internet, and I kind of describe the picture that emerges from Larry's talk and from mine, because hate is a strong emotion. It makes people more participate, more active. And I talk about corporate power, and then there is a coffee break after that, and people line up and say, how come nobody's talking about this? And I had a sense that if at that point I would raise a flag and said, after me to the Bastille, people would have followed me there. But nobody's talking about it. It just has not been part of the general political discourse, okay? It's not part of the political discourse.
Okay, I'd say before we finish this session, I'd take 1 or 2 very quick questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. Diverse voices are very important in these conversations, aren't they? Marie Ringler from Ashoka. I was very interested in a point that both of you made around polarization. And I wonder, in the work that we do at Ashoka, we bring together social entrepreneurs. One of the things that they've come up in an initiative is the idea of the polarization footprint. And the idea being, we know there are externalities in this world, right? Like CO2. So can we measure polarization in the same way that we measure CO2 and make it very expensive? Is that not something that we could try with governments that are open to it in order to make sure that we at least work on this particular lever of what you're explaining and trying to tell us about?
So I like very much the idea, it's a nice idea, polarization tax. It's a way of internalizing market externalities. It's an uphill battle. We have not yet been able to do it with something that people are much more observed now, which is carbon tax. Okay, we have not been able quite to apply it in a broad way to deal with the climate crisis that's upon us. So it will be much harder to do it with something which is much less. Part of the problem, of course, is that carbon in the atmosphere is invisible. Polarization is also very, very invisible, and it's just very hard to get people to approve polarization tax. But I like the idea. Maybe Citizen Assembly can adopt it.
Okay, last question.
Here was a question?
Yeah.
It was just a comment to your question. I think we had a lecture some days ago by Lucas Chancel. You might know him from the Inequality Report Lab in Paris. He is studying inequality, and he also studied exactly and measured the CO2 outcome by digital entrepreneurs. And of course, that would be an interesting thing, because we all know that their emissions are extraordinarily high. So this could be an access where we say this could be a tax worldwide, or Europe-wide at least, so that we get their money. We need it for the common sense and for us, for the democracy. I think, so I'm very open to taxes, but I'm only on the city level, but I would also go to the Bastille with you.
So, just a quick comment. I think to me, there is one thing that I think the history book will have no mercy on us, that we have allowed crypto mining. This idea that we're going to create value today, in this era, create value by putting carbon in the atmosphere. Imagine somebody invent a crypto coin, but you create value by carbon sequestration. That would be a great idea. But creating value by putting carbon in the atmosphere, to me, is criminal. And the fact that we're allowing it to happen, shame on us.